Family Guy has a wide variety of characters, all with their own quirks, goals, and schemes, and one of the more featured residents of Spooner Street is Glenn Quagmire. Now, we're not here to condone any of the very illegal and immoral acts that Quagmire commits on a regular basis. He has a very bad record to say the least, but who else but Quagmire? Today, we did want to touch on what we considered his more vulnerable and reputable moments. What deeds has Quagmire done that are worthy of praise, that made the world a little bit better? Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and this is Glenn Quagmire's Best Moments.
Where were we? Giggity, giggity.
We're gonna count down the times where Quagmire spoke out against others, protected those around him, and placed other people before himself. Number 5. Telling off Brian. One of Glenn's most well-known moments is when he told Brian off. At least the first time we see him lay into the K9 anyway. It begins with Peter, Glenn, and Joe becoming increasingly upset about Cleveland no longer being around for their escapades, and so they decide to find someone else to join them. When Brian offers to fill the void, Peter drops the bomb that Brian hanging around wasn't an option due to Glenn hating him.
Quagmire hates me? Hates you.
The episode continues with Brian desperate to gain Glenn's favor, and we see the attempts fail in ways that further show Glenn in a good light. While we usually see the more devious parts of his personality, this episode is set apart in that here, Glenn is more sensible, no nonsense, and is far more empathetic. After mistaking Glenn's sister for a one-night stand and leaving a fake note from an ex, Brian finally manages to take Glenn out to dinner to see if they can meet on some common ground. Instead, Glenn decides to tell Brian exactly what he thinks of him. He calls out Brian's pretentious attitude, his arrogant nature, his poor fathering, and his attraction to Lois before stepping out of the restaurant, thanking Brian for the meal.
You're just a big, sad, alcoholic bore.
The whole episode is a nod towards Quagmire's more intelligent and insightful side and gives the viewer something to think about, and we can't say that we disagree. Brian's character had transformed from moral, intelligent, and loyal, something that was pretty funny in the early seasons, having the family's voice of reason being the pet, to being snobby, pretentious, preachy, and full of BS. Quagmire wasn't wrong to call him out. Number 4. Helping Ida. Glenn is known for having a lot of pride in his military background, and the inspiration for this pursuit in the Navy goes to his father. But after Dan comes to visit Glenn and finally undergoes the sex change operation he wanted for years, Glenn is conflicted on the whole thing. It's a large adjustment for him to see his war hero father become his war hero mother.
My dad talking about decorating in women's clothing?
Though it is a process, Glenn eventually comes around to the idea, but is quickly derailed again when he finds out Ida slept with Brian, the one being on the planet Glenn seems to hate more than anyone else. Hearing that this pretentious mutt was the focus of his mom's affection was too much for Glenn to handle. After he initially finds out, his immediate response is to go next door and chase Brian around the Griffin home, beating the dog however he can.
If I ever see you anywhere near my house, I'll blow your head off!
But the moment we feel earned a spot as one of Glenn's top moments is after Ida and Brian hook up for the second time. When they're intimate again, it leads to the two of them having a longer relationship. Brian and Ida actually trying to treat one another as a partner, and Brian even treating Glenn like a son. This, of course, grates on Glenn's nerves for a number of reasons. The first is that he obviously still can't stand Brian, with it being a struggle to play nice. The second is that he's much older than Brian or anyone else he normally hangs around, making Brian talking down to him all the more annoying.
He's not my dad! I already have a dad and it's my mom!
But the viewers root for Glenn when he has a heart-to-heart with Ida, expressing that he saw her as deserving of far better than Brian. It was a shining moment, giving the audience not only another Glenn and Brian conflict, but showing the connection Glenn had with Ida, still looking up to her as a role model and hero, and not wanting her to settle out of fear of not finding anyone else. Number 3. Helping his daughters. Over the show's run, Glenn is shown to have 2 daughters in particular we focus on, one that was dropped off on his doorstep, and one that he ran to at a school dance.
There's no guarantee it's your baby.
Giggity?
With the first, Glenn was clearly out of his depth, not sure how to raise a young child that would depend so heavily on him. He was eventually pushed to the point where he felt the best thing for his daughter was to put her up for adoption, since the mother already fled from the picture. Though he does regret this briefly, he sees that his daughter went to a stable and loving home that was able to provide for her, and so pulled away from taking her back. The second, Glenn met under more stressful circumstances. While going around with his friends to find various party buses, they end up at a high school dance. Glenn makes a point of asking the age of the girl he's interested in, but things still don't go in his favor.
All right, and I just recorded you saying that, and hi, I am Glenn Quagmire.
While the young woman, Courtney, makes a point of saying his own catchphrase by habit, Glenn insists on a DNA test, which shows she's his daughter. He takes the information in stride, considering what kind of a man he is. He goes from being this carefree bachelor to trying his hardest to be a good role model and father to Courtney.
You're my daughter. I want to make sure you have everything you need.
He takes her to work with him, has her stay in his home, and takes her to movies and on camping trips, all in hopes of making up for lost time and helping her get her footing. He snaps when they get lost in the woods and are threatened by a surrounding wildfire, yelling about how he hated being called dad and how he never wanted this way of life. It was a harsh moment, but when he calms down, he expresses he wants to be there for her and he was willing to take things slower and adjust. We don't see his daughter after this, implying she moved out, but they were still in touch. Number 2. Helping land a plane. When Glenn loses his job as a pilot, he eventually loses his home and has to move in with the Griffins. After he wears out his welcome, his friends rally to try and help him, getting the idea that if he was shown to be a hero, he would have to be taken back on staff. The idea wasn't a good one, and it almost ends in a horrible, fiery disaster when Glenn doesn't go through with the plan to fly the plane when the pilots are knocked out. Instead, he loses track of time, sleeping with a gate agent. Though he almost gives up, Glenn summons enough strength to force his way into the control room and give instructions on how to land safely.
All right, now do you see a button that looks like a drunken gay guy eyeing you from across the bar?
Though not as planned, the fiasco did make Quagmire a hero and did get him his job as a pilot again. Number 1. Thwarting Terrorist. This episode started off pretty lighthearted, with Glenn wanting to share his benefit of free travel with his friends. But as with most episodes in Family Guy, even the most innocent of beginnings can end up being a horrible mess. After they return to the plane, Glenn flying them home, they are attacked by terrorists that try to force their way into the cockpit.
So just let him go, because you're not getting control of this plane.
This episode is worth mentioning, for one, how Glenn stayed calm and kept the cockpit locked shut despite the threat of the attackers, and 2, when they do manage to get into the cockpit and hold him at gunpoint, Glenn puts his naval pilot training into use, knocking the other man out by rolling the plane. This wound up ending well, despite the fact that almost everyone else on the flight ignored the seatbelt safety sign and so were also either knocked out or injured as a result of the rolling. But it was fast thinking that did help them keep control of the flight and keep anyone from being killed.
They've got a hostage in a blue shirt with a white collar.
Most of the time when we see Quagmire, it's easy to forget that he's a veteran trained to handle stressful situations like this. We don't get to see many times such as this where he shines, using his training to defend others. Hopefully that changes as the show continues, but only time will tell. Alright, but what do you guys think? What were the best moments Glenn Quagmire had on Family Guy? Let us know in the comment section. Don't forget to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist, where we break down the morality of the characters in your favorite cartoons, shows, and movies. But most importantly, stay wicked.